"Where's the tank?" The fire captain barked as the inferno crackled just beyond the ridge. Orange tongues licked the tree line like a dragon preparing to strike. I stared at the empty patch of dirt behind my house where a 4,000-gallon water tank had been less than 48 hours ago. "Gone," I said, jaw tight, sweat mixing with ash on my neck. The captain's face paled. That tank was our backup line. Who moved it? My lips twitched. The HOA. They towed it. The look on his face said it all. Disbelief giving way to fury. And just like that, the fire wasn't the only emergency blazing through our neighborhood. 2 days earlier, things were peaceful. The skies were their usual powdery blue. The sun was shining, and I was hauling back what I considered a small miracle. A steel water tank I'd managed to get approved for placement behind my house through a special wildfire readiness program. As an off-duty firefighter and a volunteer in the Regional Emergency Task Force, I knew better than most that our area was a tinderbox. Just a few miles of dry chaparral and one careless spark could send the whole place up like a box of fireworks. My neighbors weren't exactly thrilled about the looming threat, but they trusted me. Everyone, that is, except Karen. Karen was the HOA president, and she took her role with the kind of seriousness you'd expect from a wartime general, but without the charm or strategy. Her war was against anything that didn't align with her rigid vision of neighborhood perfection. That included lawn gnomes, doorbell cameras, solar panels, and now, apparently, my emergency water tank. I hadn't even finished backing the trailer into my driveway when I heard the high-pitched clack of her flip-flops charging toward me. She looked like a flamingo on a mission, clipboard in one hand, sunglasses perched aggressively on her forehead. "What is that monstrosity?" she shrieked, pointing at the tank as if it were a weapon. I calmly explained the situation. County approved, temporary placement, slated for wildfire response drills. I even offered her the paperwork, which she waved off like I was trying to hand her a contagious disease. "It's not aesthetic," she hissed. "It violates Section 3, Paragraph 9 of the HOA guidelines. No temporary storage units over 4 feet high." I stared at her, trying not to laugh. "Karen, it's a water tank for wildfires. You know, those things that keep burning down half the state." She didn't care. "You have 24 hours to remove it, or we will." I blinked. "It's going behind my house, not even visible from the street." "Visible to me," she snapped, as if her personal line of sight dictated HOA jurisdiction. I shrugged and went inside, figuring that common sense would eventually seep through. It didn't. The next morning, I was called into the station for an equipment audit. It was only supposed to take 2 hours. When I got back, the tank was gone. In its place was a patch of crushed grass and a slip of paper flapping in the wind. A violation notice taped to my front porch like a badge of honor. "Unauthorized structure removed. Property code," it read. No name, no explanation, just gone. I stormed over to Karen's place. She was watering her lawn with a smug grin, an ironic sight given her self-declared title as the community's water ethics ambassador. She looked up, not the least bit surprised to see me. "Oh, that," she said, flicking water at her petunias. "It was towed this morning. You should have read your bylaws." I gritted my teeth. That tank was registered for emergency wildfire support. It was sanctioned by the county. You just sabotaged our backup supply. Her eyebrows rose. "Well, maybe next time you'll think before parking industrial garbage in my view." The next several hours were a whirlwind of phone calls. The tow company wouldn't release it to me without HOA approval. The city impound yard didn't even know where it was at first because it had been logged as abandoned equipment. I called the county coordinator for the wildfire readiness program, and when he heard what happened, he audibly choked on his coffee. "They towed the emergency tank? Who the hell authorized that?" he asked. "Karen," I said flatly. There was a long pause. "That's a lawsuit waiting to happen." Meanwhile, smoke had begun to rise in the north. Nothing threatening yet, but the winds were shifting. I watched the sky change colors over the next day. Hues of gray and orange spreading like bruises across the horizon. My neighbors started texting me nervously. Should we be worried? Didn't you have some kind of emergency setup? Where's that water tank you showed us last month? I didn't know what to say. I had tried to protect them, but Karen and her clipboard had decided aesthetics were more important than safety. What really burned me, though, was that she had done it in secret. No board meeting, no vote, just a power move disguised as protocol. That night, as I sat watching the local news track a new blaze moving toward our region, I pulled up the security camera feed from the side of my house. Sure enough, there she was, Karen at 3:12 a.m., flashlight in hand, pointing at the tank and gesturing dramatically to two men in orange vests. She even took selfies in front of it, like she had just captured a wild animal. That's when I realized this wasn't just about rules. This was personal. I clipped the footage and emailed it to the fire department, the HOA board, and the county emergency services director. 10 minutes later, I got a call from the fire marshal himself. His voice was low, slow, and deadly serious. "We're about to have a major situation," he said. "That tank was designated for the secondary line of suppression in your sector. Without it, your street is cut off if the fire jumps the valley." I nodded silently. "I'll get it back," I said, even though I had no clue how. I looked out at the skyline, now pulsing with a distant orange glow. Somewhere up north, firefighters were already battling to stop the flames. And here I was, fighting my own fire, one made of bureaucracy, arrogance, and a woman who couldn't tell the difference between a safety measure and a lawn ornament. But she was about to find out, because now it wasn't just about a tank. It was about every neighbor on this block, and I wasn't backing down. The morning after I sent the footage felt heavier than usual. The air smelled faintly of smoke, not the barbecue kind, but the dry, crackling kind that meant danger was inching closer. I stood in my backyard, staring at the patch of dirt where the tank had been, feeling like I'd failed everyone who trusted me to keep this community safe. My phone buzzed with weather alerts and emergency updates. Wind speed increasing, humidity dropping, fire line moving southeast. That line put us in the yellow zone, one tier away from mandatory evacuation, and we didn't even have our backup water. The fire marshal had told me he was initiating an inquiry, but red tape moved slower than wildfire. Meanwhile, Karen was out in full force, prancing around in a pastel visor, handing out flyers for the upcoming Green Lawn Gala. I couldn't believe it. With the sky literally darkening, she was hosting a community gathering to celebrate eco-conscious landscaping and her own self-proclaimed leadership on water ethics. The same woman who had just towed away our fire preparedness infrastructure was now talking about native grass blends and ornamental mulch. I wasn't the only one fuming. My neighbor Sophia caught me as I was heading to the hardware store to pick up more hose fittings. "Mike," she whispered sharply, "have you seen this?" She handed me one of Karen's flyers. Tucked between paragraphs about drought-tolerant lavender and bug-repelling flower beds was a smug little line. "Let's keep our neighborhood beautiful and tank-free." She even made it rhyme, like a Dr. Seuss villain. Sophia's eyes blazed. She says she did a public service removing that metal eyesore. I took a deep breath, willing myself not to rip the paper in half. Didn't she just flood her entire front yard last night? Sophia nodded. Sprinklers ran for hours. Half her lawn's still soggy. The irony was almost too rich to process. I thanked Sophia and continued on. Something about the gala announcement bothered me more than usual. Hosting a party in the middle of a fire advisory felt not just ignorant. It felt like a distraction tactic. That night, my suspicions were confirmed. Around 2:00 a.m., I got a call from the volunteer dispatch line. A small fire had broken out near the community entrance. Palm tree, most likely electrical. Firefighters got there quick and stopped it from spreading. The scary part? They initially couldn't access the backup line because the emergency tank was missing. A lieutenant on the call recognized my address. "Didn't you have a unit deployed out there?" he asked. I told him what happened. He didn't respond for a beat, then just said, "Jesus, that tank could have cut our setup time in half." It didn't stop there. The next morning, I drove down to the edge of our zone to take stock of what was left of our emergency layout. Sprinklers were installed, but coverage was spotty without the tank. I took photos of where the water lines had ended up, dry, coiled, and now useless. A couple of the newer residents had no idea we even had a fire readiness program. Karen, it seemed, had been quietly scrubbing any sign of it from the community forums. I dug into the HOA meeting logs. She had blocked 4 funding proposals, all related to fire prep. One she described as a waste of resources for hypothetical scenarios. That's when I found the thread, an email chain between Karen and someone named Garrett, marked as City Liaison. Garrett, I remembered, was the mayor's cousin or nephew or some other political parasite. Their exchange was eye-opening. Karen wrote, "Tank issue resolved. Had it towed under aesthetic compliance. No need to inform full board. Justify if needed. Water hazard plus improper permits." Garrett replied, "Nice work. I'll smooth it with the city. Label as construction waste if they call." It wasn't just arrogance anymore. It was sabotage. She wasn't protecting our neighborhood. She was managing her image. I called my friend Travis, a guy I trained with during wildfire drills. He now worked with the county's emergency planning team. I forwarded him everything. "You got proof of suppression here," he said. "Not just the tank, but repeated attempts to block readiness infrastructure. This could turn legal fast." Later that day, I gathered a few trusted neighbors, Sophia, Mr. Davidson from the cul-de-sac, and Natalie, who worked nights at the hospital. I laid it all out, the email thread, the tank footage, the meeting logs. Natalie looked stunned. She fined me last year for putting sandbags near my back door during that flash flood. She said they were a tripping hazard. I had to remove them while rainwater was literally rushing through my hallway. Mr. Davidson added, "She rejected my fire escape ladder as non-compliant. I'm 72. How am I supposed to get down from the second floor? Parachute?" The outrage was electric. We decided to draft a petition to present to the full HOA board. The demand was simple: an emergency vote to remove Karen from her position for endangering the community. I knew she wouldn't go down without a fight, so we had to build this right. Facts, evidence, community backing. Meanwhile, the weather got worse. Reports of spot fires closer to our area popped up. The fire department was on edge. Our zone was now officially marked as heightened risk. Karen, however, remained oblivious or deliberately blind. She doubled down on the gala plans. Setup started in her front yard with tents, balloons, a portable stage, even a bubble machine for the kids. It was like watching a birthday party being thrown in the middle of an evacuation drill. I watched from my porch as she bossed around a pair of college kids she'd hired to string lights across her trellis. Then I noticed the extension cord she'd run from her house to the decorative palm trees she'd just re-illuminated, the same trees that nearly caught fire the night before. I walked over. "Karen, you might want to think twice about running high-voltage lights through damp landscaping while we're under red flag conditions." She turned to me with a fake smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mike, shouldn't you be off rescuing kittens or something?" Before I could answer, there was a sharp buzz from above. A drone, not one of mine. I looked up to see a county fire drone doing aerial mapping. Karen's party wasn't just poorly timed. It was being watched. She didn't know it yet, but her party was about to become the center of a much bigger firestorm, and it had nothing to do with balloons or bubble machines. Because the moment that drone footage sensed with county data and noticed a missing tank from the emergency grid, questions were going to be asked, loud ones, and I was going to be ready with the answers. The next morning brought a thick haze that blanketed the entire neighborhood in nuded gray, a smoky warning that the wildfires weren't slowing down. Birds had stopped chirping. The air had that dry electrical charge that makes your skin itch, like nature bracing for impact. As I stood on my porch sipping bitter coffee, I heard the sound of a loudspeaker echoing from the community entrance. Fire officials were going door to door, alerting residents to prepare for possible evacuation within the next 48 hours. That should have triggered a wave of concern, but Karen, She was still setting up folding chairs for her eco-celebration as if the world wasn't burning just a few miles down the road. I'd had enough of waiting for karma to kick in. I called Travis again and asked if the drone data from the previous day had been reviewed. He told me it had, and that the missing water tank had raised red flags across 3 departments. I didn't have to explain anything. The footage of my property, the pre-registration of the tank, and Karen's orchestrated removal all came together to form what Travis called a negligent disruption of public safety infrastructure. He said the fire marshal was preparing a report to be handed to the HOA legal team. That would be a bombshell, but I wanted more than internal memos. I wanted the neighborhood to know what kind of leadership they had. That afternoon, I printed every email, screenshot, and HOA log Karen had manipulated. I put them into packets, one for every board member. Sophia and I went door to door, delivering them, avoiding Karen's line of sight. We made it to 13 homes before she spotted us. She marched down her driveway like a wind-up toy powered by rage. "Mike," she screeched, "are you distributing unauthorized materials? That's solicitation. I'll have you fined." I held up one of the packets, just some light reading for the board. Meeting minutes, emails, footage. You know, stuff that's supposed to be public anyway. Her eyes narrowed like knives. "You're trying to smear me," she said. "This is a personal vendetta." I didn't flinch. "Karen, it became personal the moment you put this neighborhood in danger to protect your ego." She huffed and stormed back toward her lawn party, tripping over a sprinkler hose as if the universe wanted to underline my point. By that evening, Sophia had gathered over 30 signatures from residents demanding an emergency HOA meeting. Some folks hadn't trusted Karen from the start. Others had kept quiet for fear of being fined or singled out. But now, with the fire looming and the emergency water tank missing, even the ones who once sat on the fence were jumping to our side. What really turned the tide was the footage of Karen coordinating with the private towel. We played it on a small projector during a cul-de-sac meeting, right onto the garage door of Mr. Davidson's house. Neighbors gasped when they saw her pointing and posing like she captured a criminal. One man, Phil, who had only moved in 6 months ago, leaned over and whispered, "I thought she was just annoying. I didn't know she was dangerous." Dangerous was the right word, because while she was busy organizing a neighborhood photo op for a local gardening magazine, the fire line shifted again, this time faster and more aggressively. Travis texted me a county map showing the projected burn path. If the wind kept up its current pace, we'd be in its trajectory by sunrise. That wasn't a scare tactic. That was math. I needed the tank back now. No more waiting on paperwork or permissions. I called Travis and asked where it was being held. He gave me the location, County 7, on the outskirts of town. Technically off limits to civilians without proper clearance. But this wasn't a civilian issue anymore. This was life and property on the line. I called in a favor from my old firehouse buddy Chris, who now worked logistics. "You've got 20 minutes, he said. "No one's watching after hours, but you better have it hitched before midnight." Sophia and I took my truck, attached the same trailer the tank had arrived on, and drove to the yard. The gates were half open, the lock broken, probably from years of neglect. We found the tank in a far corner, covered in a dusty tarp labeled impounded equipment. It was surreal seeing it like that, like a retired piece of machinery instead of the critical asset it was. We winched it on with help from Chris's friend, a utility worker who'd gone for snacks and left us alone for 15 minutes. By the time we rolled out, I could already feel my heart pounding with anticipation and adrenaline. We got back just past 1 o'clock in the morning. I reversed the trailer into its original spot and reconnected the emergency hoses. Sophia handled the pressure valves while I locked down the placement bracket. It wasn't regulation perfect, but it would hold. Just as we finished, headlights appeared at the end of the street. Karen's SUV rolled up slowly, like a movie villain entrance. She stepped out, barefoot in silk pajamas, eyes wide with fury. "You brought it back," she shouted. "This is illegal. This is theft." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The sound of a fire truck siren rising in the distance did all the talking. As if on cue, A county emergency vehicle pulled in behind her, lights flashing. The driver stepped out. It was Lieutenant Reyes, the same man who'd asked about the tank when the palm tree flared up. He walked past Karen, looked at the tank, then looked at me. "Mike, this the unit from the wildfire prep program." I nodded. "Good," he said. "We just updated the suppression route. This tank's part of the backup line now." Karen tried to object, but he cut her off. "Ma'am, if you interfere with fire deployment again, I'll have to cite you for obstruction during an emergency declaration. I suggest you go home." She opened her mouth, thought better of it, and slammed her car door instead, tires squealing as she peeled off down the road. The silence she left behind was sweeter than any apology. I looked around. A few neighbors had come out to watch, robes on, some even clapping softly. Sophia smiled at me. "Now that," she said, "was worth waiting for." I glanced at the tank, standing tall under the glow of the street light, and finally allowed myself to breathe. It was back. It was working. And this time, no clipboard warrior was going to take it away. The fire came in fast. At first, it was a distant glow over the northern hills, like a slow sunset refusing to fade. But by dawn, that glow had sharpened into a violent orange wall, churning and snarling with the wind, devouring everything in its path. The alert came through all channels: county, state, and emergency radio. Evacuation was recommended for the surrounding zones, and our neighborhood had just been upgraded from heightened risk to immediate concern. As I stood in my backyard watching the smoke roll in like an angry tide, my phone buzzed with one simple message from Travis: "It's happening. We need your tank now." In minutes, fire crews began to flood into the neighborhood. Trucks pulled up at every corner, hoses coiled, nozzles primed, radios chattering with rapid orders. I guided the crew toward the tank behind my house, the very same tank Karen had tried to erase from existence. They moved quickly, attaching their lines to the dual outlet system I had maintained and tested myself. Water surged from the tank through industrial-grade hoses, spraying over rooftops and hedges, creating a dampened perimeter. The captain on duty gave me a firm nod. "You saved us hours of setup," he said. "This may turn the tide." The neighborhood erupted into controlled chaos. Some families were already packed and leaving. Others, unsure what to do, ran around grabbing pets and documents. Sophia took charge of a group of elderly neighbors, loading them into cars with oxygen tanks and overnight bags. Natalie from the hospital coordinated a first aid station out of her garage. It was a level of unity we hadn't seen in years, because when the flames get close enough, even HOA politics can't hold a grudge. Except one person hadn't gotten the memo: Karen. I hadn't seen her since her tantrum the night I brought the tank back, but it didn't take long for her to reappear in spectacular fashion. While I was helping one of the crews direct water flow, I heard someone screaming over the engine noise. "This is a violation. This entire setup is unauthorized." I turned to see her storming down the street in a pink velour tracksuit, barefoot again, flailing her arms like a furious traffic cone. One of the firefighters tried to intercept her, but she ducked around him and made a beeline for the water tank. She reached for one of the valves, and I shouted her name so loud the nearest dog barked. "Karen, don't you touch that." But she didn't stop. She grabbed the valve handle and yanked. Nothing moved. Thankfully, I'd locked the controls with a padlock the night before, but the fact that she even tried during an active fire response, it was surreal. A second firefighter stepped in and restrained her, gently but firmly. "Ma'am," he said with the patience of a saint, "you are interfering with emergency suppression efforts. If you don't step back, you will be detained." Karen screamed about bylaws, property rights, and how she never approved this abomination. Her voice was drowned out by the helicopter now circling overhead, dropping retardant on the nearby hillside. It wasn't just a fire anymore. It was war, and she was trying to unplug the cannons. The officer who had escorted the crew earlier returned and pulled her aside. They spoke for a while. Well, he spoke. She waved her hands, turned red, then finally went limp with defeat as she was escorted back to her home under the eye of a uniformed deputy. As all of this unfolded, The fire line hit the back slope of our neighborhood. I'll never forget the sound. It wasn't a roar. It was a tearing, crackling howl, like the world itself was splitting. Embers flew over rooftops. Trees hissed and popped as heat vaporized their sap. The crews responded immediately. Hoses turned, water sprayed in arcs. I ran to help a younger firefighter carry an extra hose line up to Sophia's backyard, which bordered the slope. Her wood fence was already smoldering when we got there. We doused it just in time. It was 3 hours of brutal, non-stop effort, containing, redirecting, defending. The water tank ran hot, then empty, then refilled with a city line bypass truck we called in for reinforcements. Without that tank, our entire side of the community would have been defenseless during those first critical hours, and everyone knew it. By mid-afternoon, the fire crews had gained enough control to declare the perimeter stabilized. Burnt brush and charred fences marked the outer boundary, but not a single house was lost. A miracle, the captain said, a result of preparation, planning, and rapid response. He asked to take a photo with the tank and the volunteers. We stood together, covered in soot, smiling like kids at the end of a school project. The tank gleamed behind us like a quiet sentinel. Then came the news vans. The first truck arrived an hour later, then 2 more. Word had spread that an HOA had removed emergency equipment only to need it days later to save the very homes they tried to protect from visual disruption. Karen's story went national before she even realized it. Her house was featured in a B-roll shot, surrounded by melted garden decorations and half-deflated balloons from her canceled gala. Reporters cornered me for quotes, and I gave them the facts, straight, calm, and verifiable. Karen tried to approach during one of the segments but was held back again, this time by a representative from the city's emergency coordination office. He told her, loud enough for the cameras to pick up, "You're currently under investigation for obstruction of emergency resources. I'd recommend legal counsel." She didn't scream that time. She just walked back to her porch and sat down, quiet and hollow-eyed. A few neighbors passed by her with bottled water and towels, but no one stopped, not because we didn't care, but because we had all seen what selfishness looked like when dressed in community service, and we were done pretending. As the sun dipped below the smoke-streaked horizon, the worst of it was behind us. People hugged in the street. Kids who had been kept inside for 2 days ran wild in ash-flecked yards. I walked the length of the cul-de-sac, checking in on everyone. When I returned home, I found Sophia and Natalie sitting on my steps with pizza and Gatorade. "Emergency command team snacks," Natalie joked. I sat between them, too tired to speak. Above us, the tank stood like a beacon of sanity. Its steel body bore a few smoke stains, but it was solid, proud, and finally respected. And for the first time since all this had started, I felt like the neighborhood had finally seen through the smoke. Literally and figuratively, the fire hadn't just burned the trees. It had scorched the lies, the bureaucracy, and the image Karen tried to protect. And now all that was left was the truth. The morning after the fire had been contained, the neighborhood was eerily quiet. There were no leaf blowers, no HOA golf carts cruising around with clipboards, and not even the usual chorus of barking dogs. The only sound was the wind gently pushing ash off rooftops and the occasional drip of water from scorched gutters. It wasn't silence born of fear. It was something closer to awe. Somehow, against the odds, our neighborhood had survived, and more importantly, people finally understood why the tank mattered. I spent most of that day inspecting the tank, running maintenance checks, and logging performance stats for the emergency crews. It had done its job and more, feeding over 6 hoses, assisting 2 ladder units, and sustaining spray coverage for nearly 3 hours before needing to be replenished. A city technician even dropped by with a clipboard and asked if I'd be willing to let them do a case study on how private preparedness units could integrate with public response infrastructure. I told them I'd be happy to share everything, as long as they included the part where the HOA tried to sabotage it. Karen, on the other hand, had gone underground. Her SUV was parked in the driveway, but no one had seen her since the fire crews left. A notice was duct taped to her door, stamped with the county seal. It was an official citation for interfering with emergency operations. Below that was another piece of paper, this one less formal. A petition for her removal from the HOA board, now covered in nearly every neighbor's signature. Sophia had slipped it under her door the night before. By lunchtime, the HOA had called an emergency board meeting in the community center. The place was packed. People who hadn't attended a single meeting in 5 years showed up with folding chairs and coffee mugs, ready to witness the end of Karen's reign. She arrived late, sunglasses on, face stiff, holding a large binder like a bulletproof shield, but there was no salvaging her image, not after what everyone had witnessed, not after the fire. The board members didn't waste time. Sophia read aloud the documented incidents, the email thread with the city liaison, the midnight towing of the tank, the footage of her interfering during an active fire response. When she finished, Mr. Davidson stood up and asked a question everyone had been waiting to hear. "Is there any reason," he said, voice steady, "why someone who endangered this entire community should still be allowed to represent us?" Karen didn't even try to defend herself. She muttered something about intentions and misunderstandings, but the words sounded hollow, disconnected from reality. The vote was unanimous. Effective immediately, Karen was removed as president and barred from holding any HOA office for a minimum of 5 years. She didn't speak. She just stood turned and walked out of the room, binder clutched to her chest like it was the only thing she had left. And for once, no one followed her. The room broke into applause. Not wild, celebratory applause, but the kind that came from a deep, shared relief. People began shaking hands, hugging, making plans for a community cleanup. Sophia was appointed interim president and immediately called for a new emergency preparedness committee. I was asked to chair it. I agreed on one condition, that we start with infrastructure, not rules. No more worrying about garden gnomes while we ignored the things that actually kept us safe. That weekend, the tank was officially certified by the city as an emergency asset. They gave me a laminated placard to post on it, declaring it a sanctioned wildfire response unit. But instead of mounting it alone, I invited the neighborhood to help. Kids brought paint, and adults brought tools. Together, we transformed the steel beast into a symbol of resilience. We painted flames being doused by waves, a phoenix rising from ash, and in big, bold letters along the side, "This tank saves homes." One of the kids, a sharp little girl named Emma, brought a scrap of wood from her backyard and asked if she could make a sign for it. We helped her carve the words, "Try towing this now, Karen." It was meant as a joke, but it got a lot of laughs, and someone nailed it to a nearby fence post. That sign became something of a neighborhood legend. Even the fire crew who returned for a follow-up drive-through stopped to take a photo with it. A few weeks later, the city held a community recognition event. Our neighborhood was honored for its fast and effective volunteer response. I was handed a plaque, but what mattered most to me was watching everyone else. People who had once stayed silent out of fear standing proud, smiling, telling their stories to reporters and officials. No more whispers. No more hiding from clipboards. Karen moved out 3 months later. Her house sat on the market for a while before someone finally bought it, repainted the shutters, and joined Sophia's committee within a week. No one ever mentioned her by name again. It wasn't out of cruelty. It was because her name had become irrelevant. She had made herself a symbol of resistance to progress, and in the end, progress had won. As for the tank, it stayed exactly where it was, anchored, reinforced, and respected. During the next fire season, it was the first resource listed in the emergency readiness plan for our area. Other neighborhoods started installing their own versions, and a few even called to ask for help with the setup. Travis told me the county was considering a grant to incentivize them statewide. Sometimes I sit on my porch in the evenings, watching the sun set behind the hills, now blackened at their edges from that terrifying blaze. The air is cooler now, and the neighborhood hums with new energy. People working together, looking out for one another, knowing firsthand what could have happened. And every time I see someone pause to glance at that tank, maybe smile or give it a little salute, I remember how close we came to disaster, and how one terrible mistake made out of arrogance and control nearly cost us everything. But we pushed back, We stood together, and in the ashes of that fight, we built something better. Not just a neighborhood, but a community. One that would never let a tank get towed again without asking why. One that had learned the hard way that the prettiest lawn in the world means nothing if your house burns down. One that now knew exactly who to listen to when the sky started glowing orange. And one that finally was prepared.